All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. All right, so 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. I am very excited to have as my guest today, Jonathan Sabbagh. Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Nice to be here.
Awesome. So Jonathan is the co-founder and CEO of Journey Clinical, the leading telehealth platform expanding access to psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. A serial entrepreneur, Jonathan built his career in finance, spending over 2 decades working for hedge funds and building his businesses in Switzerland and New York City. After receiving a difficult diagnosis of PTSD and extreme burnout, Jonathan left the world of finance to focus on his mental health, during which he personally experienced transformative benefits of plant medicine and ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, or KAP. Jonathan's personal healing journey inspired him to begin formal clinical psychology training at the New School with the vision of expanding access to transformative psychedelic-assisted therapies to the billions of Americans living with depression and anxiety. Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you.
So just before we get going here, reading your bio, I can't help but remark on the people get involved in that field in business and finance, and a lot of things seem to happen that lead them to turn around. But we'll get to that. I just had to say that. But before we get going, Jonathan, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
Sure. So I grew up in Switzerland. My family are Egyptian Jews, actually, so they're all immigrants over there. And my father was actually raised in Brooklyn, so I used to come to New York quite often. And I now live in New York, which was a early childhood dream of mine. And so I'm pretty happy. I've been here for almost 10 years now.
Wow, awesome. All right, so let's start out here. I'm really curious about how this started for you.
Sure. So, as you read in my bio, I spent most of my career working in finance. And yes, a lot of people in that field burn out. It's very intense. It's very difficult to work and sustain a career in that field. But really, the burnout, I think, was more a result of years and years of neglect of a condition I wasn't aware of. And so I struggled really with depression, with anxiety, with substance abuse for a very, very long time, not understanding what was going on with me. And as you can imagine, that's quite daunting to have a condition that you don't really understand until maybe 8 years ago now. A friend of mine, where I was really on a downward spiral, recommended trying ayahuasca and brought me to a traditional ayahuasca ceremony here in New York. And it was very helpful, very transformative. I actually did 7 of them in 2 weeks. And so it was a lot. And after continuing to work with that medicine for almost 2 years, I started to find myself in a loop, and it was very helpful. I really was able to stabilize a lot of my condition, but I didn't quite understand what was going on. I became unable to process essentially those ceremonies. And I sought help, and I sought help from a psychedelically informed therapist here in New York, who I've been working with for years now. And for the first time in my life, I was given a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, which was obviously difficult, but also relieving. And when I got that diagnosis, we did a lot of work with ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. And I really had the chance to experience the power of the therapeutic alliance, working with a professional who understood what I was going through and who was able to use this treatment as an adjunct to therapy. And that really informed a lot of what we built at Journey Clinical. And, after a while, I didn't feel a connection with the work in finance anymore. I didn't feel a sense of purpose really. And so I quit finance and I went back to school here in New York at the New School to study clinical psychology. And as many do, I believe, when you do this kind of work, you want to reconcile who you were with who you want to be. And I believe that we all have a change in perspective, essentially, and we just see ourselves as we were, but in a different light. And so, I decided that it was a good idea for me to bring back all of that experience I had as an entrepreneur to support my goal of expanding access to these treatments. And that's when I decided to found Journey Clinical.
A few things. You mentioned that earlier on, you going through a lot of challenges, suffering, maybe even discomfort. You used the word, you said you had a condition that went unrecognized. What did you mean by condition?
PTSD.
Early on?
I've had PTSD for my whole life.
Your whole life?
Yeah.
Okay. And if I may, due to what?
Childhood trauma.
Okay. So there was a lot going on there. Had you ever, prior to the ayahuasca treatment, had you ever sought out any other therapy?
I had, actually. When I had that burnout, I found a very good psychiatrist in Switzerland who really saved me and who really helped me out. And he treated me with traditional psychiatric medication. And it's important to note that I really believe in traditional psychiatric medication. I think they have their place. I don't think that psychedelics are a panacea. And so, he treated me with antidepressants and mood stabilizers, and that really saved my life at that moment in time. Mm-hmm. But after a while, working here, at some point in New York, I had a psychiatrist who prescribed me 2 antidepressants, antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, benzodiazepines, and it was just really just medication without anything. And so that's when I think, there's a crossroads of holistic medicine to incorporate that with therapy, with frontier treatments. And so I think that's also a lot of my personal ethos and our company's ethos.
With that first ayahuasca experience, what was it about that specifically that you learned, that you saw, that you experienced, that shifted things for you?
Well, when I went to that experience, I really think I was at the end of the road. I didn't have any expectation. I was just open to whatever. And, I said, why not? Let's try this. And I never worked with any kind of drugs, at least psychedelics, in a way that was, sort of like intentional and ceremonial. It was mostly recreational, which can also be fine. But when I did that, I think that experience, for anybody who's tried ayahuasca, it's definitely not a recreational experience. And I think what I saw was essentially the inner conflict that I was, dealing with. I think an IFS, for example, parallel here could be, I saw, the exile and the firefighters and the defenses really that were polarized in my own system. And it was very difficult, honestly. It was a very difficult experience, and it remained a difficult experience for a long time. And so when I was able to essentially view what was going on, I at least had some kind of understanding of the condition that I had been in for all these years.
Okay, so talk about the evolution of Journey Clinical. Go ahead. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Can we pause 1 second?
Of course. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry.
No.
I can redo that. I can redo that last question if you want. I got distracted because someone came to sit at our table.
No. It's no worries at all. No, my question was, can you talk about, how and why you started Journey Clinical?
Of course. When we started to consider how to support mainstream adoption of these treatments, what we landed on is that empowering licensed mental health professionals to incorporate these treatments as an adjunct to therapy in their practice is actually the most scalable and the most sustainable and safe way to do it, very much like EMDR. And the reason for that is because they're embedded in local communities. They have a relationship with the patient population. Even more importantly, the therapeutic alliance that they have with their patients is, in our perspective, the safest container to deliver these treatments. And so we started to consider what was the main barrier to entry for therapists to include these treatments in their practice. And what we landed on after interviewing 600 of them was that forming and maintaining relationships with prescribing physicians is actually the main issue. I don't know if you know this, but actually there's only 25,000 psychiatrists in America. They're mostly located in large cities. There's an equal shortage of psychiatric nurse practitioners. And you have 40 million people in paratherapy supported by about 1.3 million therapists. So, that's a real problem. And what tends to happen is that when they do have these relationships, they're quite fickle, actually. They also put a lot of pressure on costs for the patient and the therapist, which limits their ability to expand their practice and increase their revenue. And so for the most part, what they're doing is referring out either to clinics or direct-to-consumer platforms. And if you are a patient, you know this, finding a therapist that you like is really hard. It takes time to find someone, and building that therapeutic alliance takes a lot of time. And you're all of a sudden being asked to have potentially the most cathartic experience of your life with someone you've never met, or maybe an app. And so that, as a patient experience, really isn't reasonable, right?
Right.
And then on top of that, they're also having a disjointed experience with a prescriber who is not necessarily informed. So their medication is managed separately. There's no communication with the therapist. So that whole dynamic really led us to believe that supporting and empowering these therapists in their practice is really what's most important. And so what we decided to do is, and it's important to make that distinction about us. We're not a ketamine clinic. That's not what we do. We're not a ketamine provider. We're essentially building the back-end infrastructure for psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy to exist, right? Like if you look at organizations like MAPS or Compass Pathways, their whole ethos is including the therapist in this process. And so they cannot do that without essentially a delivery mechanism, which is what we're building to enable that distribution network to have it, right? So we're a network, we're a infrastructure solution.
So, okay, we got listeners here who are therapists, survivors, combination of the two. They come to you, and what happens?
Yeah. So what we do essentially at Journey Clinical is we set them up with everything they need to incorporate ketamine-assisted psychotherapy in their practice. And that starts with a telehealth platform where we support a collaborative care model. And practically what that means is that therapists become members of Journey Clinical. They refer their patients to our in-house medical team. So we are the doctor. We employ 30 medical professionals in our company. And we'll see those patients for a full hour intake. We'll take full medical and psychiatric history. If they're eligible for the treatment, we'll send them enough for 2 CAP sessions. We'll send sublingual ketamine to their home, they'll have 2 CAP sessions, which they can do in a variety of modalities. We support at home, we support in person, remote, group remote, retreat formats, even couples therapy, and we're always adding to it. And the reason why we do that is because we believe that therapists need to have the flexibility to adapt the treatment modality to their practice and to their needs. And that also patients, might want to try one modality with their therapist and evolve to another. So we're here offering flexibility in that way. The patient will come back to us. Sorry.
Okay, hang on. So yeah, I just want to make sure I get what you're saying here. So first of all, when you said you support, does that mean a therapist comes to you and says, I have a client gets in contact with you, you provide them with and support for a CAP session? Does that mean that you're supporting, and if so, how online? Is there a therapist with them online, or when they're taking this?
So the way it works is that you're a therapist. So you're a therapist. You become a member of Journey Clinical. You refer your patients to our team through our portal, and I'll walk you through all the other services that we give for therapists, and that patient will book a telehealth consultation with our medical team, okay?
Right.
And then we'll send your patients the ketamine, and they will have the ketamine session with you, the therapist, in a variety of modalities, which are the modalities that we described. So you are essentially delivering the CAP session, right? We believe that that's the container that should be done. And so generally we observe, for example, the therapist will do a preparation session, the dosing session, and integration work, right? So that structure and that protocol is taught to and delivered by the member therapist. We are essentially acting as your in-house doctor.
Okay.
Right. And
so the therapist, if I'm that therapist, I'm getting educated by you?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I was missing that piece.
Of course. No, for sure. So maybe just to finish on the essentially treatment modality, and then I'll walk you through all the education that we have. So essentially that patient would come back to us for dose adjustments, and then we'll see them regularly. The other part of what we do is that we're here essentially supporting a collaborative care model. So if there is a difficult experience or a difficult event, the patient will triangulate with the therapist and our medical team, and we'll assess and support the therapist and the patient in that process. And so that's really important, because that's the power of what we deliver at Journey, is the collaborative care model that mitigates negative outcomes substantially because of that relationship. But on top of that, what we also do is that we collaborate with the therapist to build a bespoke treatment plan at scale for the patients. So, we don't believe that there is one size fits all for these treatments. We don't think that patients do 6 ketamine sessions a month and then keep coming. Everybody is different, and everybody needs to have a tailored treatment plan. So what we're delivering essentially is concierge mental health at scale by supporting the therapist, who is our primary customer. Then we have a whole tech platform, and it's all tech enabled. So there's a prescriber portal for our in-house medical team, but there is a therapist portal. And on that portal, there is a 22 module training that Fluence developed for us, which is included in their membership, which they have access to. We have peer consultation groups. There's experiential learning, so they can have a CAP session that's facilitated by other Journey members if they're eligible, of course. We help them with legal resources and marketing resources and library of resources for just CAP in general. And patients, we have webinars with specialists who deliver, hour-long talks or 4-hour webinars on consent to touch and IFS. So there's a whole slew of services, and it's all HIPAA compliant and very easy to use. So they refer their patients for the platform, and then they can track their outcomes and communicate with a therapist. And then there's a patient portal. So it's a very holistic model. And we have, today almost 800 therapists in our platform that work with us. And we've seen, close to 2,000 patients in the last 10 months. And I was really amazed actually to see the other day that through our network in the last 10 months, our therapists have delivered more than 3,500 CAP sessions. So it's really an awesome number.
Very impressive. I like what you're saying. I because I was thinking to myself, there are probably therapists out there thinking, well, how am I going to do this? Where do I start? But it sounds like you're providing a lot of education.
Yeah, it's more than that. It's education, it's resources, it's also community, right? That's really important. I think people tend to forget that being a therapist is a pretty lonely job. And so having access to a network of peers who work with you, we're doing peer consultation. There's a lot of meetups. There's mentorship opportunities. There's a whole community dynamic that's really quite amazing between our therapists that we support and enable and facilitate. And that makes it very unique as our offering. So it's something that we've doubled down very much, is the community aspect as well.
Yeah. And I think you hit the nail on the head too. That is crucial for a lot of therapists out there. So what do you say to the therapists who are listening to this, who are saying, well, okay, how do I know if my client might be right for this?
Such an important question, and a question we get all the time. So, we have, for example, on our portal, there's weekly meetings with our medical team. We have protocol meetings, and we also have a meeting with our medical team that explains what a good referral is. And people would be surprised that, today about 20% of Americans suffer from anxiety and depression. So a large part, unfortunately,
I would say that's a low estimate.
It might be a low estimate. It might be low. Yeah, it might be higher. And, so what we find, and the surprise of our therapist, is that, actually a large part of their patients are probably eligible for these treatments. Again, we don't believe it's a panacea. We don't believe it's for everybody. We don't approve everybody, but a lot of people who are unfortunately suffering from these conditions and others like PTSD or OCD, if they have bipolar depression, there's a whole spectrum of conditions that really can be supported by that. And what we found was that, especially for patients who have been stuck or have not been progressing, the feedback from our therapist was, wow, after a few sessions, I had a patient who has not been progressing for years and finally had a breakthrough. And that doesn't only help the patients, it also helps the therapist, right? People forget that therapist burnout is a real thing. Mm-hmm. And working with patients who don't progress for years can be very, very difficult.
Now, this might seem like a basic question, and I know every case is different. What is the goal of a CAP session?
Well, it's a very good question, actually. What is the goal? I think, there's a structure to it, and maybe we can start with that, in terms of what is psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. And so, we believe that it's not simply giving someone drugs and having them have a reaction. There are some positive outcomes to people just taking ketamine to reduce anxiety, suicidality, depression. There's a lot of studies that show that. But our perspective is that working with the patients in the context of preparation, dosing, and integration is what's going to lead to long-term behavioral change, right? So if you have a patient who is, first of all, it's good to understand what preparation is. It's not just intention setting. It's actually, managing expectations, because there is such a thing as transference to the medicine itself. And so having them bring a mindful approach to that session, no matter how it unfolds or how strong the experience is really important. Then having the CAP session, for example, it's always in the context of a therapeutic alliance. That's how we work. So even if we do at-home treatment, they have to do preparation before, they have to vet the chaperone, they have to check in before, they have to check in after, and then they have to do integration work. So we're not just giving ketamine to people at home to take alone. And when they do those sessions, then they're holding space. They're creating a container for their patient to essentially be able to have this potentially extremely cathartic experience. And then the other part is, and that's very important, is the integration. And a lot of studies have shown that it's through integration that long-term behavioral change happens, right? And so ketamine has a lot of properties. It helps with, regulation of glutamate. It also increases neuroplasticity. And so there's a window of neuroplasticity that happens after that session where the therapist can work with the patient to really integrate that experience and progress. And so that's the goal essentially of that tool. Mm-hmm. But it's the goal of what we're doing is to have it as an adjunct to therapy. And so work it into a therapeutic process and have it on an as needed basis when it's appropriate. And so some people might need a lot of ketamine sessions in the beginning, not need it for a while, have an mm-hmm. event and come back and need it again. So that's why we find that working with the therapist and being their back end basically is how we'll support this the best.
What's the usual time that a CAP session would take?
Yeah, it's roughly 90 minutes.
Okay.
It'd be 2 hours.
Are we talking about microdosing or not?
We don't do microdosing. You can talk about psycholytic versus psychedelic. That might be different. So depending on the format, if you want to have a more conversational interaction, a lower dose psycholytic session may be more appropriate for mm-hmm. couples therapy, for example. If someone wants to go deeper, then a higher dose, more inward experience might be more appropriate.
Yeah. I mean, obviously there's a lot of attention now being given to psychedelic-assisted therapy. I've had several people on the podcast. I think what makes you stand out, Jonathan, and Journey Clinical stand out, if I may say this, you seem to have done a lot of research into what's what therapists are looking for and what's needed. It's very interesting. I'm wondering if you feel, and I'm thinking, imagine a lot of therapists are thinking to themselves who are listening to this, do you feel it's necessary for the therapists themselves to go through this?
It's a very good question. So some people feel that way, and they feel that it's necessary for a therapist to have a psychedelic experience to do so. Some feel that it's not. There is evidence of both, I think. What we've done, there are people in clinical trials or doctors who administer medication on an ongoing basis and don't necessarily take it themselves. There are others who believe that having a psychedelic experience is essential to be able to understand the space in which the patient evolves in. We don't have a perspective, but what we did do is we did manage to offer the opportunity for therapists to experience it by, having, group cap sessions with other journey therapists. And so but they have to be eligible. Mm-hmm. So we don't, if someone's doesn't have a condition, we will not prescribe to them. So that's important because we want to protect the licenses of our prescribers as well.
Let me just remind everyone, I'm speaking with Jonathan Sabbagh of Journey Clinical. And your website, Jonathan, is what?
journeyclinical.com.
Okay. Really interesting. I love the idea that a therapist can come to you, not only get education, but get support. There's a community there. It sounds like you've developed this in a very 360-degree way and from a perspective like that. So for those who are interested, what do they do?
Well, they can go to journeyclinical.com and they can sign up for a demo with our team on our website, and we'll book a call with them, and we will be happy to walk them through what we're doing through our platform and onboard them.
Okay. And in terms of getting up to speed such that they're ready to refer and have a client go through this process, how long would that take?
We've seen it on average, it's about a month, I think, for people to go through all the, there's 22 modules of training. They also can get C credits for our training. We have got another training on preparation and integration, which is not required. We do make exceptions, of course, for people who have gone through other CAP trainings that don't need to redo it. They have access to the training, but they don't have it as a requirement if they've already done another training. So, it depends, but usually it's about a month, I'd say.
Okay. And just before you go, can you talk a little bit about the difference between, say, a ketamine-assisted session and other psychedelic sessions?
Other psychedelics meaning like
other
compounds?
Substances? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and by the way, we'll definitely be integrating those other compounds as we develop, as they become FDA approved, right? So we're open to, we're drug agnostic in that way. I mean, it's just the difference, I think, is the impact on the brain of how ketamine functions. And so, ketamine is an antagonist to NMDA receptors, which essentially causes reabsorption of glutamate. It also causes increased neuroplasticity. Other psychedelics also cause increased neuroplasticity, but they work on different neuroreceptors. Mm-hmm. And so, there is an argument, people call them traditional psychedelics, but, they do have different interactions of the brain.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, Jonathan, really appreciate you coming on here. Once again, journeyclinical.com. Super interesting. And I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing your passion and your story too.
Thank you.
I think there's a lot there. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I had a great time.
All right, sir. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.